Right, we are going. So yeah, navigating your goals as a new mum. Um, so we'll go through like a little bit of kind of background about ourselves kind of first and why this kind of like subject has kind of come up. Then I've got like a little bit of a kind of like a presentation, and then if we've got any kind of like questions as we kind of go through, then feel free to yeah, kind of ask and do a little bit of a shout out. Like I said, I'll keep this bit like nice and kind of like short. So yeah, about me. So worked as a personal trainer and a nutritionist. Um, Seems like a long time ago now. It was like, 13 years I've kind of been doing this kind of job. So to start with, I kind of had a fully booked kind of like in-person business, and then COVID struck, which seems like years ago now, and shut gyms down. And then that's where I started to actually kind of like transition online. And then in May last year, left in-person coaching altogether um, after I did my master's in mental health. And I decided to set up my new coaching business, which is Confidently You. And then I've also got like a group coaching program also. And essentially, I help women who want to lose body fat, but also have maybe had like a disordered relationship with food in the past, have maybe struggled with yo-yo dieting, and maybe suffer with like poor body image as well. Because that was what my master's was in. And it's an area that I'm really, yeah, kind of like passionate about. Um, yeah, and I guess makes like coaching a little bit kind of like different. And then if Holly, you want to say a little bit about yourself?
So I don't know if you girls follow me, but I basically started off my page as like a Slimming World page many years ago. And then yeah, basically spent like my whole life on a diet, pretty much. um, Sort of got into a good routine with my fitness, started training, lost a bit of weight. I then started working with Callum, started actually lifting weights, started to change my body, then fell pregnant. She was planned, and I continued training all throughout pregnancy. I do think that me training in pregnancy definitely had a really positive impact on my birth and my recovery. I had a really, really good birth. I had a really sort of quick physical recovery after birth. And I do think it's because I stayed quite fit and healthy throughout that. And then postpartum, I mean, I struggled at first, I won't lie, but I think about 6 months postpartum, I started training properly again. And then, yeah, here I am now. I'm back to training, not quite like I was before I had a baby, but obviously, this is what all this is about.
Yeah. No, but it's cool. And I think it's like a lot of it was probably like looking at how training and like life in general has kind of like changed. Because I also kind of like coached you, before, you know, you fell pregnant as well. And it's just like,
Yeah,
it's kind of like interesting, like obviously like how we've had to kind of like manipulate training a little bit, kind of like your values have massively changed.
yeah.
And then probably like you kind of said, I think you had like a lot of maybe like pressure around certain things. And yeah.
Yeah. So I think I had pressure from both angles. So I had a lot of pressure in regards to where I was already in quite a good place with my body. So it was a lot of pressure to almost bounce back to that. But then I also had a lot of pressure when I did start tracking my calories, training again, because it was very much like, well, what are you doing that so soon for? And so it's a bit like you can't really win. um, and a lot of women have said to me, like, when they've said that they're back training, they want to get back walking again, back tracking their calories to feel good again. A lot of people will say to them, like, well, why are you doing that so soon? Like, you should be grateful for the body you've got now. And it's a lot of like conflicting opinions.
Mm. Yeah, which I mean, it must be like even harder for, for because I think there's a lot of conflicting stuff anyway, particularly when you look at like social media and kind of like everything else. And it kind of links like nicely. Well, it does link nicely. That's why we kind of made this presentation to kind of what we're kind of like talking about within this. So obviously, like these are just some of the kind of like the challenges. Um, Particularly I think the big ones, obviously, like time and energy is
Yeah.
like the biggest things that I kind of hear from like with yourself and like the other ladies that I kind of work with. And I think something that you've probably felt as well.
Yeah.
Because I think like, we massively changed programming, right? You went from like doing, 3 to 4 times in the gym, maybe more.
Yeah.
So you pulling it back down to two, right?
Yeah, literally. I think I was doing 3 to 4 weight training sessions, and I was also doing boxing once a week as well. And if I could also fit in a spin class, whereas now I'm lucky to get two in.
Yeah, so like so there's a massive change from like that part of
Yeah.
stuff. Obviously we got like the physical kind of like recovery, like depending kind of like where we're at, and that's obviously we're not going to go like too much into. Well, I'm not going to go into that stuff kind of like at all because it is so individual,
Yeah.
kind of like person to person. So that's where you kind of need like an individual kind of like approach to that. Um, the body image issues, I think that's like a kind of a huge one. So there's two sides, like you kind of said. I think there's like the pressure to kind of like snap back to where you were before, but also on the flip side of it, the guilt and the maybe like unsolicited advice from other people and family members and
Yeah.
you say people on socials as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, which can obviously be difficult. Things such as like depression and anxiety tend to be quite kind of like common, and I kind of like covered like guilt as well. So like a lot of this kind of like what I'm going to talk about now is kind of heading into, I guess, what I work with, and so does like Hollywood, like kind of coaches, sorry, with clients around self-talk, the mindset side of stuff, because I think if we get this stuff right, it then does have a knock-on effect to kind of everything else. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of like psychological kind of flexibility, um, which is kind of like on the next slide. But this is something that like some questions that you can kind of ask yourself, because I think it's good to kind of like dig into, because I think the most important thing to figure out is making sure that when you are making decisions, when you are kind of like, again, wanting to kind of maybe get back into fitness, it's kind of coming from a place that's your values and not from anyone else's. Like, like Holly, for example, knew you wanted to get back into fitness, right? And it's the right thing for you.
Yeah. I think I did try too early as well, and that's when I realized that wasn't quite right for me. Um, and I then did actually stop, and I waited a good few months before going back. So I think I went back to the gym 8 weeks postpartum.
Mhm.
And I was like posting pictures on my story, like I'm back in the gym already. Like, it wasn't for me. I think it was to show other people, like, look how quickly I can do it. But actually, it was so hard. Like, I wasn't ready physically, I wasn't ready mentally, and I had no time because obviously Esme was only 8 weeks old.
Yeah. But it's kind of like a lot of that's going to be, again, it's a completely new way of living, right? And it's just,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's like, and that's what I mean is it's going to be pressures from kind of like each side. So that's why kind of like asking yourself like some of these questions. These are just kind of like general as well, to be honest. Like, and obviously sometimes with clients we get a little bit more kind of like specific, but they can kind of be kind of interesting things to kind of look through and ask yourself. And then I guess what we talk about when we're talking about like psychological flexibility is for many of you, you might find that you're currently like stuck in your own head, particularly if you're like doom scrolling on socials, you're getting kind of advice from other people, like, everyone's got, I think an opinion when it comes from out like, like, family and both sides of the family and everything else. Um, so when you're stuck in your own head, like the first thing that most people try and do is try and avoid the feeling. So this is kind of like trying to suppress emotions, trying to, pretend they're not kind of like there. And sometimes this kind of leads to like unhelpful kind of like coping mechanisms. So again, like social media is one of those, right? So if you find yourself doom scrolling or you find yourself sometimes overeating, right? That's quite common with people that overeat. It's actually not necessarily always to do with the food itself. It's actually a coping mechanism and a kind of like an avoidance kind of like strategy. You might find that you believe the thought as well. So that's like another kind of like common one is we can't control the thoughts that kind of like pop up into our heads. So like a skill to kind of really practice and learn. And this is why I'm a massive fan of psychological flexibility and ACT and that type of stuff, is your ability to be able to have a thought, but not actually see it as kind of like truth, because that can lead to like rumination. So rumination, if you don't know, is basically when you get like the same thought going over and over and over and over again. And obviously like you beating yourself up. We could go on autopilot, act on impulse, and then the last one is actually lose sight of what truly kind of matters. So we actually kind of get derailed from a long-term kind of objective, and what we actually value. So like, an example is like what, Holly said about like actually potentially when she went back to the gym too early and took the photos, actually maybe it wasn't for her, it was to show people that she was back and stuff like we all fall victim to it. Um, which is why what we want to try and get closer to is this kind of like psychological kind of flexibility. So this actually essentially is the acceptance that having negative thoughts and negative feelings is just a part of being human. It's a part of life. And actually to have, good mental fitness, it's not about the avoidance of these feelings. It's actually making sure that when you have these feelings, that you still stay grounded. So it's actually allowing these emotions in. So we're not trying to avoid them. We want to kind of like sit with them with no judgment. We want to kind of do it from a place of acceptance. There's ways that we can kind of diffuse the thoughts. So when I kind of talked about before, in terms of most people have these thoughts and they see them as kind of truth. Actually, this is our ability to kind of go, actually, thinking about, thoughts as passing clouds, passing cars. Like, there's other diffusional techniques as well that we can kind of use in ACT. And then I guess the most important thing is then you connect to your values and you could like take committed actions towards them. But if I kind of like ask most people on webinars that I kind of run on like values or like my clients when they first kind of like sign up, do they know what their personal values are? Most people can't kind of answer that kind of question. Um, and I mean, would you like Holly, for example, would you say that your values changed when you became a mum as well, like
Oh,
from
100%. 100%. Yeah. Because things that were important before just aren't important after you become a mum. And obviously, then as well, I think for me, everything, my values before were all about me.
Mhm.
And then obviously, when you become a mum, you literally cannot be selfish anymore. Um, so yeah, massively.
Yeah. And that's what's like kind of like cool to see as well. Like I said, like when I've like, that was what's good that I kind of like coached you before, and it was interesting to see the transition where it was like kind of probably more focused towards, I guess it would be fair to say like more aesthetic kind of like targets, which isn't,
Oh, 100%.
yeah. And it's not like that's not the case now, right? We've still got, I mean, we've got a photo shoot coming up, so it's still like an aesthetic.
Yeah. And I think everyone wants to look good. And like, of course we do. But I think, yeah, like you say, before looking good was potentially more important than feeling good, if that makes sense. Because I was very in my own head about it. Whereas now I just want to feel healthy. I want to be able to lift her up without cracking my back. Like I lift weights so I can lift Esme, basically.
And there's like, there's a combination. Also, like, what's interesting with that, I think it's been good as in it showed you what you can do with 2 sessions because I've noticed it straight away. Like,
Yeah.
actually, you've probably hit like the heaviest weights that we've been lifting because it's again, you don't need to be in the gym all the time to get those kind of results. And you can do both. Like it's okay to have that goal of being able to lift Esme, but also, you said like you wanted to get rid of the mum bum, which I'd never heard
Yeah.
of before. Like you
It
apparently
is a thing. It's real.
it's that term. It's cool to have both. But this is why like the value stuff is so important, but also like it's important to kind of like go back to it sometimes as your kind of like values and core beliefs around life change, and you will find that they will probably change at different kind of like stages. I've only got my golden retriever and to look after. I was going to say my wife as well, but she looks after me probably. No, it's both. But I definitely noticed from my 20s to my 30s, for example, like there was a huge shift. Um,
Yeah.
particularly with training and how I see training now, like, from like living in a gym all the time, like now it's actually I want to be in and out pretty quickly. Because I want the kind of like the results and I've got other things that I kind of care about rather than spending hours in the gym. Um, but basically, if you don't kind of know them, this is where kind of like there can be one, you're going to be more vulnerable to like the messages on social media and other people's kind of like opinions and everything else. And two, like how are you making decisions? Because usually when you don't know them and you feel a little bit guilty, it's usually because there's a lack of alignment there between your behaviors and then what you're actually deep down, kind of like care about. And when I kind of like say to most people, like, normally your behaviors will kind of like show you truly what you value. So if there is a gap, that's where we've got to go, right? How do we kind of like fix that? Um, so yeah, so like I kind of said there, if you don't know what they are, and then if we look at some of the kind of like values here, these are kind of like, there's loads. So these are what I can kind of fit in one screen. I don't want to do like 20 slides um on just this one. And again, we want to kind of keep this to like 30 minutes, but like again, for example, if you will say that one of your kind of like values is kind of like kindness and respect, then are you showing kindness and respect to yourself? So is beating yourself up, calling yourself names in the mirror, um, when you like skip a workout or you have a certain meal, is that showing kindness and respect? On the flip side, we can kind of look at it if, I don't know, we're saying kind of like other kind of like goals could be, sorry, other values could be family. How is being the healthiest, strongest version of yourself, gonna kind of like help with this stuff? And this is why I think most people kind of like, and I guess I've kind of found it since I did my master's from like working as a one-to-one PT, where it was just kind of most people kind of get it wrong with their kind of like goals and their targets because we think it's fat loss as the main goal. Whereas, and then that's where the guilt comes from when you eat a meal out or you go over calories. But like if you meet up, have a meal out, but it's with your family and it's doing something you enjoy, or it's connections, another one, right? And you're kind of like connecting with people, that's another value. Then why should you feel guilty about that, right? And you're going to be so much more consistent if you start living to your values rather than actually just focusing on, holy shit, I've gained 2 pounds, or again, beating yourself up because it's like, oh, I should be going to the gym 5 times a week. But actually, life has changed now, right? The values are different and the responsibilities are kind of different with this. And then a really good kind of like analogy to kind of use to kind of tell like who is making the decisions. So you have to bear with me with this one. I'll try and do it fairly quick. But like if we think about like your brain as a bus or your mind like a bus, then essentially you should be the one driving. So you should be the one driving based on your values and the committed actions that you decided to take, right? So that should be who you want to be, the values you want to live by, that should be the person driving. And in the back, you've got your emotions, your feelings, and everything else like that that sometimes pop up. So when we feel like emotionally overwhelmed, when we get triggered, when we see something online, when we feel guilty, that's when we can kind of fall into that pattern of making impulsive choices, or we can beat ourselves up. But in each situation, that's where you got to ask yourself who is driving. So are we making, what's that?
I like that.
It's cool, isn't it? So this is kind of like textbook like ACT. So when we talk about like acceptance and commitment therapy, this is kind of like a good way of kind of like looking at it. So for example, we can use the example of like Holly going into the gym earlier, right? It might be, and I'm not saying like, I'm kind of pinpointing that as a thing, but like just as an example, it's kind of like, was that because it was anxiety? Was it kind of like driving? Was it kind of like maybe people pleasing? Was it, what was it that was driving? Or was it you? And if you get this stuff kind of like right and you practice it, that's what I mean with like vulnerability. When you can't go online, look at something and be like, you shouldn't be triggered because you should go back to, cool, good for them, but my values are this. I've got friends that, compete in kind of like body, that's kind of off topic, but compete in bodybuilding, for example, and one's just done a show and he's really lean and he looked great. And, part of my brain was like, oh my God, should I be that lean as well as a PT? But it doesn't reflect my values. I know what my values are. So that's why this stuff is so important. It's the same if you see someone else online that's like, oh, like training 5 days a week, you can come back and go, I've got different values to that person rather than thinking I should be doing that, if that kind of makes sense.
Mm.
And then just kind of like finally, this is where kind of like, I won't spend too long on this, but this is where like self-compassion is equally kind of like as important. It's been shown within research that we can't bully ourselves into change. So again, like it's like, I'm sure, with like, kids and stuff like that, it works the same way. If you shout at your kid, is that going to have the response that you want?
I haven't got there yet. I'll let you know.
That's why I paused because I was just about to say it, and you shouted at Esme, and I was just
Not
like,
quite old enough yet. I'll let you know in a
yeah,
year.
oh, that's the kind of like respond. But it's the same kind of thing, right? Like, as in, what reaction do you think you're gonna have?
Yeah,
You just wouldn't do it, right? So why are we talking to ourselves like that?
yeah,
And again, all it does is actually it makes eating behaviors worse. So this is why kind of like it's known as a dieting kind of paradox. It's like most people, when they try and diet from a place of self-hate, get fatter because you end up self-sabotaging yourself, like just over.
yeah.
Whereas if you do this based on your values, what you care about, and from a place of kind of like, compassion and everything else like that, That's what's important. But that doesn't mean this is not like the stuff that you see on social media. I did a post about this today where it's just kind of like love yourself and shouting affirmations in the mirror because as we know with self flexibility, it's okay to feel like shit. So
Yeah,
it's
positive
okay.
vibes only.
Oh God, yeah. Like, but stuff like that is actually bad for mental health. It's okay
Yeah.
to go, I've had no sleep. I feel like shit. I'm covered in baby sick. This is just your calls, Ollie. That's
Yeah,
all.
literally. It's my check-in every week.
Yeah. But like it's and actually but still going, but one, I'm going to be compassionate to myself, and two, based on my values, I'm still going to make sure that I have a decent enough breakfast. Or maybe I ate too much chocolate last night, but cool, what is my next move? And if we just keep going back to like who's driving and every kind of decision you make is kind of like towards your values or it's away. And that's essentially again textbook. But I mean, do you want to kind of go through some of like practical advice? I've just kind of put like a list of kind of again, it's very general, but what would you say is kind of like changed from a training and nutritional standpoint with you?
Yeah. So I think for me personally, I think especially if you're before becoming a mum, you're focusing on like the gym, nutrition, steps, like all of it. I do think there's a lot of pressure to jump straight back into that. So I think after, like, it's okay to just focus on just getting some walks in and just start hitting your steps. Like, then introduce calories. Like, you don't have to go all in. I think it's important to know that you can introduce things back in slowly. And if you're not ready to start working out, you don't have to. Um, and yeah, when you are ready to start working out, it doesn't have to be hour-long gym sessions. Like you've said there, like quick, frequent 10, 20 minute workouts, home workouts. If you can get to the gym, like half out, like it doesn't have to be as intense as it was before. And like you said earlier, like some of the weights that I'm now lifting are heavier than what I was lifting when I was training 4 times a week. From now
Mhm.
only doing 2 sessions, and my sessions I would say are no longer than an hour. So it's just having that like acceptance that your training does not have to be the same, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, work out when the baby sleeps is
It's probably poor advice, right? But like it's
yeah. So the worst advice the no, actually, the worst advice to give a mum is sleep when the baby sleeps, because that doesn't happen. But work out when the baby sleeps. I did try to do this originally when she was a newborn. I was like, I'm going to get home workouts in, blah, blah, blah. And she would nap for like 20 minutes. And by the time I'd got her to sleep, got downstairs, started doing something, she'd wake up and I'd be like, great, haven't done anything. So it's actually easier to work out with her awake, like say that like on the playmat and the bouncer and like watching and make it funny. And that is actually easier than trying to do it when they're asleep. Because as obviously other mums will know, when they're asleep, there's so much other stuff that needs doing. Um, and then you can feel guilty, I think, as well if you've only got 20 minutes and you're using that to work out. I used to find I'd feel really guilty because I'd be like, oh, well, bottles need washing, the Hoover needs doing, like, oh, she got loads of wash it, like I need to go out. Like there's always something else to be doing. Um, so yeah, like don't feel guilty for taking 20 minutes for yourself to work out because the other stuff, like it can wait. The bottles can be washed up later. um, and yeah, like that one says, be kind to yourself 100%. It's not going to be a smooth sailing workout routine. Every week's going to look so different. You could have a week where everything goes to plan, you get everything you've got scheduled ticked off, and then a sleep regression hits or teething or they get a bug and then you can't do it like and then it feels like you failed. And I do this quite a lot. um I'll be on my check-in like, oh, this week's so shit. I haven't been able to get to the gym, like beat myself up about it. And then we'll usually have a call and it's actually not that bad. And it's just a case of, well, actually, no, I've still been drinking my water, I've still been fueling my body, making sure I'm eating properly. I've got out for a few walks. Like it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I think that's what I'm currently now navigating. Um, obviously with your help. I've always been very all or nothing, and you literally cannot be like that once you've had a baby.
Um, No, I think it's a good lesson for like, I had that with like again, 20s versus 30s. I mean it changes and also that's where most people don't get to their goal because I think life is always going to be chaotic.
Yeah,
And that's why like it's come like this is why like advice like this and also there's kind of like very cliche kind of like nutrition advice there.
yeah,
It's never going to be kind of like perfect, but I think one thing that I can kind of say like you agree with like nutrition. I think it's like simplicity to start with.
yeah,
Um, Again, the basics of nutrition will always be the same. Like the social media world's gone just nuts with stuff like this at the moment. It's just there's a new thing coming out all the time. Like
yeah,
the basic nutrition works. It's okay to still have enjoyment in there as well and making sure you include stuff like that. And then most importantly, like don't expect it to be perfect. That's why like I hate putting nutrition advice out like this because none of us eat like this all the time.
yeah,
So we just want to make sure that we're kind of got some nourishment in there, focusing on the basics, like making sure we've got like fiber, making sure we've got like protein there. But also like you probably are going to be picking up stuff on the go and going to have some days that are just messy, like circadian rhythm's going to be off with sleep deprivation, and that's just part of life, right? But if you can just keep driving in the right direction, you'll be fine. Anything to add with nutrition? Because I mean, your meals are much more.
I would say, especially if anyone's like in a almost newborn phase, my number one piece of advice would be to prep your breakfast, even if you don't eat it until 3 p.m. Prep it, because I went through a stage when she was very little where I wouldn't prep breakfast, and then especially when Tom went back to work, and it's surprising how much time a newborn can take up considering they don't do anything. But it would get to 3 p.m. and I'd be like, oh, I haven't eaten anything, and then I'd be sat eating biscuits. So I just think I started prepping like overnight oats or baked oats, and sometimes I'd have them for lunch, but it's a meal that's there. If you get to eat it for breakfast, great. If you eat it later in the day, great. It's going to be something that's actually, like you say, got some healthy fats in it, fiber. Like it's something that's going to nourish you rather than, like you say, getting to lunchtime and then eating something that's really quick, like a packet of biscuits. So, yeah, prep a breakfast.
I think that's a great way of doing it as well, like, as in like just focus on one thing at a time. Like, 'cause
Yeah,
that's what I kind of meant with like again, that's just kind of like textbook with sometimes when you get all of this information, that's why sometimes when I put these on slides, I think it can kind of like overwhelm people. But again, this is going to be like a run into kind of like why coaching is important. And we're not just saying that, like, obviously, Holly's a coach, I coach her, I have a coach. I've always had some level of kind of like coach throughout my career because actually, that's what can help with this stuff when life is kind of like really hectic. It just gives you that structure, like that little bit of kind of like accountability. It's someone to again steer you in the right direction when you feel like everything's kind of like failing and it's gone off. Because again, the amount of calls that we've kind of had where you've kind of said, it's been the worst week ever, and actually we've just reframed it, and it's not because, and that's the cool thing again with your page and what you share and everything else. Like it's just more that's real life. There's a lot of stuff out there that it's not real. Like this stuff is
yeah,
messy. Um, but obviously, like I said, it was quite mad out of like 67 people. So thank you to the people that kind of like signed up. But again, I think it was it like it is being recorded and I did put that in the message as well. So I think people either forget and if the email hasn't gone out, I don't know why that is. But I will make sure everyone gets to recording and gets the email. Also, but have we got any kind of like questions at all?
tumbleweed.
So but like I said, like I know like sometimes it's awkward like speaking on these as well. But if you do have any, obviously like always feel free to kind of reach out at any point, like send DMs, always happy to kind of like help. Um,
Yeah, same here with especially with like I said, like advice for newborns. I'm no expert, but I am happy to help.
yeah, be for haven't you? But we will yeah, so like I said, I will send this kind of over. I was just trying to join actually just now. Um but yeah, I'll make sure that this gets kind of like sent over on email. So yeah, feel free to kind of like reply or respond or whatever. And then yeah, thank you all for for joining.
Yeah, thank you, ladies that joined.
Speak to you all soon.